Hello everyone and welcome, Valueth here. Today we will be discussing how to effectively raid heal as a Preservation Evoker in the current tier. In this video, we will be going over the most popular talent builds and their advantages and disadvantages. We will also be discussing our stat priorities for both of these builds, a quick summary of our tier set and how that impacts our gameplay, how to play each of these builds, and lastly, how to manage your various ramps and combos. If you are interested in a comprehensive Preservation Evoker healing guide, which goes over the entire spec and class, go check out my Evoker guide. You can find a link in the description or simply click the link above. But before we dive into this raid guide, make sure you hit that like button if you enjoyed this content. And I also want to hear from all you Preservation Evokers out there, and specific about how you feel about the class this tier. Let me know in the comments. And lastly, remember to hit that subscribe button. Only about 10% of my viewers are actually subscribed to the channel, and it would really help me out. But let's get into it. There is one clear winner when it comes to talent builds this tier when we look at the top mythic raiding players on Warcraft logs, and that is the Echo Reversion build. This may surprise many people, but this build is incredibly strong in the current tier for many reasons. The Big Blossom build, on the other hand, is significantly more popular for heroic raiders, and is still very strong and is capable of pushing out insane healing with much less effort, which is why so many people still run it. Let's start off talking about the Echo build. It has some incredible throughput potential, while at the same time being very mana efficient. Here are some of the advantages of this build. Because Echo application and consumption is the focus of this build, it means you have direct control of who will be the target of your healing, which is one of the bigger weaknesses of the Big Blossom build. This build is also not as restricted to having players clumped up in a small area to receive healing like the Big Blossom build is, but instead is much more flexible with player movement. It is more mana efficient compared to the Big Blossom, as we will be consuming all of our Essence Burst on free Echo applications, which also helps stack up our temporal compression. Once those stacks are consumed, you get another Essence Burst, which allows for even more free echoes to be pushed out. Stasis is an incredible spell, and if you load it up correctly, can provide you with an insane amount of immediate burst healing or a very strong hot. Stasis is very versatile, and there's a multitude of different ways you can load it up and release it, depending on what you need in the moment. There are also several variations to the builds you can tailor to your playstyle, while still maintaining the core functionality and strength of the build. But there are some real disadvantages to the build as well. This talent build is much harder to play, and even harder to master. If you are not on point with your Echo ramps and consumptions, you will quickly fall behind and do less healing than ideal. This build is very unforgiving, and requires a lot of practice and boss encounter knowledge to play well. You will also be using Living Flame for healing more so than damage, meaning your DPS will be abysmal. This is the Echo build that I found most people use. There are of course variations of this that are personal choices, but I think this provides a decent build for our purposes. So let's go over it and figure out what makes it tick. The first 4 rows are exactly the same between the two builds. In row 5 is where we see the first change, in that we pick up Golden Hour instead of Fluttering Seedlings. This is an obvious change considering we would never drop Emerald Blossom in this build at all. Golden Hour directly buffs Reversion and makes it into a mini rewind every time you use it. If we read exactly what it says here, Reversion will instantly heal the target for 15% of damage taken in the last 5 seconds. Let's do some basic math here to illustrate why this talent is so powerful. Let's say you have 3 full strength echoes out, meaning 105% of healing gets transferred to the echo targets. It is 105% because of the Time Lord talent we pick up right below Golden Hour. Let's also say that there's 900,000 of incoming damage that is split evenly between the 3 players over the last 5 seconds, meaning each player takes 300,000 in damage. You make the decision to hit Reversion on target A, and this is the following healing received by all 3 of your companions. For target A, the person you directly hit Reversion on would receive healing based upon 15% of the 300,000 damage taken, or 45,000, which is 15% multiplied by 300,000. But this target also had an Echo on them, so we need to factor in the Echo replicated healing benefit as well. A second Reversion will be applied for 105% effectiveness the instant you hit Reversion on the target, meaning an additional 47,250 in healing will be received. So how did we arrive at the 47,250 in healing, you might ask? Well, the Echo replicated healing is based on the original reversion that was put, which was 45,000. So you simply take 45,000 and multiply that by 105%, and you arrive at 47,250. So in total, Target A will receive 92,250 in Golden Hour healing. Now targets B and C only receive the Echo Reversion benefit of 47,250 each, for a total of 94,500. Remember, only the target that you place the reversion on will receive a double reversion stack. Everyone else only gets the Echo Replicated reversion benefit. So combined between all three of the targets, they receive a total of 186,750 in total Golden Hour healing in an instant. But they now also have the heal over time benefit from reversions rolling on them as well, which can easily be between 12 and 16,000 per tick for non-crits, and around 30,000 for crits. Now imagine you have 10 to 12 people with Echoes out on your raid, and they all take a large amount of damage at the same time. One reversion click can heal your raid for an insane amount in an instant. You can very easily push out 400 to 500,000 in Golden Hour healing, depending on how many full strength Echoes you had out. That is an incredible amount of healing you can do in an instant to your raid, while at the same time sets you up to do even more healing with some of your other talents, more specifically, Grace Period. Grace Period increases healing down to targets with reversion on them for up to 15%, depending on how many stacks of Grace Period you talent into. This is quite powerful, and this is why we want to have as many reversions out as possible for as long as possible. For an average raid boss fight, your reversion heal over time can be between 60,000 and 80,000 over your HPS, and Golden Hour will likely be anywhere between 10,000 and 20,000 if you manage this mechanic very well. Because we talented into Golden Hour, we also pick up Time Lord in row 6 instead of Field of Dreams. This is an obvious choice considering what we just talked about, as this makes Echo's replicated healing 50% stronger. That means that your full strength Echoes will replicate 105% of healing, which is 70% base times 1.5, and your Temporal Anomaly Echoes will replicate 45% of healing, which is 30% base times 1.5. The next change comes in row 8, where we pick up Spark of Insight instead of Power Nexus. Power Nexus makes sense for the Big Blossom build, because you can instantly push out 2 of them at max essence. But for the Echo build, Spark of Insight has tremendous value for us, as Echo is considered a bronze spell. To understand this, we have to go back up to row 3 and read what the Temporal Compression talent provides us. It says that each bronze spell we cast, which in our case here would be primarily Echoes, it causes your next Empower spell to reach maximum empowerment 5% faster for each stack, capping out at 4 stacks or 20%. Now let's think about this for a second in combination with Spark of Insight, but also in relation to our tier set. Spark of Insight triggers a free Echo every 4 casts of a bronze spell thanks to Temporal Compression, meaning more Echoes out on our raid. But Temporal Compression also allows our empowered spells to finish casting faster. Our tier set provides us a chance to apply Echoes to our raid when casting our empowered spells, which means if we can finish casting them faster, we can apply more Echoes faster. That's a pretty powerful loop we got going on here. The last change is in the last row of the talent tree, where we pick up Stasis instead of Cycle of Life. Again, this is an obvious choice considering the playstyle of this build. Stasis is one of the most powerful abilities we have as Preservation Evokers, and this build makes full use of its power. I will have an entire section dedicated to how we use this spell effectively later in the video. Suffice it to say for now, learning how and when to use this ability will improve your numbers and performance substantially. Let's switch gears a bit and talk about the Big Blossom build, and why it's such a potent and easy to play spec. Here are some of the advantages. This build has insane burst potential if you time things right. It is incredibly well suited for fights where your raid is frequently stacked together. Because we spend a great deal of our time fishing for Essence Burst procs with Living Flame, this spec does a fair amount of damage as well. It is a very easy build to pick up and learn, but can provide the more experienced player with avenues for min-maxing that is quite satisfying. But there are some real disadvantages to this build as well. It drains your mana incredibly fast. Emerald Blossoms are expensive, and is why we want to use Living Flame as much as possible to get Essence Burst procs. It also has a very high degree of randomness to its healing. You have little to no control over who gets healed when you unleash your Emerald Blossoms. In order to fully maximize its effectiveness, it does require your raid to be decently stacked a significant amount of time. There are several encounters in the current tier where that is just not possible. I'm thinking Volcross and Naimu, where your raid is literally split in half. These types of fight diminishes the effectiveness of this build tremendously. But let's get into the build itself. Again, the first 4 rows are identical, but in row 5 we pick up Fluttering Seedling. This talent directly increases the value of Emerald Blossom, as it heals 2 additional players for a portion of its initial heal. You have no control over who gets this healing though, just as you have limited control over who gets the initial healing from the Emerald Blossom. We also pick up Field of Dreams right below, which also increases the value of Emerald Blossom. Whenever you cast Emerald Blossom, you have a 30% chance that one of your Fluttering Seedlings turn into a full-blown Emerald Blossom. It is worth noting here, if this procs an Emerald Blossom, that blossom has the same chance to proc seedlings, which then also has the 30% chance to proc another blossom. This is very RNG based, but there are times when you get a lot of these procs back to back, and it can push out absurd amounts of healing on your raid. The next difference is in row 8, where we pick up Power Nexus. This increases your max essence to 6, which allows us to cast 2 Emerald Blossoms back to back, as their essence cost is 3. More blossoms means more chances to proc Fluttering Seedlings, which means more chances to proc Field of Dreams. I bet you're all starting to see how this build operates and why it's so powerful, but also quite easy to execute. The last choice is we pick up Cycle of Life instead of Stasis. This talent states that every 3 Emerald Blossoms leave behind a sprout that gathers 10% of the healing done over 8 seconds. At the end of that 8 seconds, it sprouts and releases all of the stored healing evenly amongst allies within 30 yards. A few things to note here. You have no control over who gets the healing at the end. Also, the Emerald Blossoms procced off a Field of Dreams will count towards the 3 required blossoms to trigger the sprout to start absorbing healing. That is it for the discussion of both of these builds. Either or can be used to great effectiveness and can be an absolute powerhouse for raid healing. Each of them have vastly different playstyles, so keep that in mind when you choose which one you want to play. Let's move on to talk about our stat priorities between both of these builds. For the Echo build, we will prioritize crit because every time our reversions crit, it extends the duration by 1 second. Interesting note about this, since we are getting our Season 1 tier set back in Season 4, with the expected gear levels next season, we may very well be up to 70 to 80% crit chance for our reversions. That is an insane prospect and will make the Echo build insanely good. We should try to aim for at least 30 to 35% crit. It's okay to go over 35%, but you don't want to completely ignore all of your other stats. If you are within this range, you should be good to go. Don't forget to use Buzzing Rune either, it adds a lot of crit. After crit, we want to prioritize Mastery. Our Mastery says that we do more healing to targets that have less health percentage than us. This means that our personal defensives are basically mini CDs for us during damage events, as it helps us maintain a higher health percentage compared to others. Try to have at least between 50 and 60% Mastery and you should be good to go. Our third stat is Versatility, as we care very little about haste. Spark of Insight already makes our empowered spells cast faster, so there's very little need for haste. Versatility just makes you do more healing and take less damage. Pretty simple. Haste is by far our least important stat, so remember that. Now moving on to the Big Blossom build. Our highest priority is Mastery by a mile. We want as much of it as possible when playing this build, and it's not uncommon to see Evokers with 85 to 90% Mastery. Crit is also of importance here, as you want to make sure you crit with your blossoms as often as possible. Try to aim for anywhere between 30 and 35% if you can, and again, don't forget your Buzzing Rune. Same as for the Echo build, haste has very little importance with this build, which is why we want Versatility as our third priority. Let's talk about our tier set for a brief moment. Our 2-piece set bonus says that our empowered spells cast up to 3 living flames at enemies or allies at 50% effectiveness. Our 4-piece set bonus makes our living flames have 33% chance to apply a full strength echo on allies healed or a nearby ally who doesn't already have an echo on them. There's a lot of things to unpack here, so let's first talk about our 2-piece set bonus. This is by far the strongest of the two, as it provides us with direct increases to healing and damage. This set is very powerful for both the builds we're discussing in this video, but in particular it's very strong with the Echo build. This set makes our already incredibly strong Stasis spell all of a sudden significantly more powerful. Stasis is a required spell for the Echo build, but is generally not picked up in the Big Blossom one. I will go into more details on how to perform our Stasis ramp combo in just a few minutes, but for now, our 2-piece set bonus makes our Stasis include up to 6 Living Flames for free, has the potential to apply 2 to 6 free full strength echoes, but can also proc Essence Bursts. More full strength echoes means more healing for both builds, but it directly feeds into the foundation of the Echo build, which is apply echoes to as many people as possible, and then hit Reversion. Our 4-piece is good, but it has significant RNG and is not something you can rely upon when you need it. It is a nice to have, since you will be triggering it with just your normal gameplay, as we want to utilize all of our empowered spells as much as possible. But let's get into how to play both of these builds, starting with the Echo build. Your main strategy in this build is making sure you spread your echoes to as many players as you can, and then consume those echoes with your various other abilities. Which ones you use is very dependent upon the type of damage you're trying to heal, so it's up to you to make the right decision at the right time. The following are several ways we can consume our echoes. The most important spell to use in this build outside of your echoes is Reversion. This is not going to be as strong of a heal over time effect as Dream Breath if you're looking at it from a raw direct healing standpoint, but Reversion has the advantage of being able to extend its duration when it crits. Not to mention, it also triggers Golden Hour, which can add up to quite a bit of healing. Considering crit is a premium stat for this build, your Reversion HOTS will crit a lot, extending its duration for quite a bit, which makes this a very high priority spell to click. Let's also not forget that you will be running double point grace period, which increases all the healing you do to players with Reversion on them by 15%. Because of this, you're gonna want to make sure you have Reversion on as many people as possible for as long as possible. This is why it's important to spend your Essence Burst procs on full strength echoes on your raid, to maximize the healing that Reversion provides. But Reversion is not the only spell you can or should use to consume your echoes. If you manage to have Reversions out on your raid already, and you need another very strong heal over time effect on top of it, you want to make sure you have procced your Call of Ysera talent by using Verdant Embrace first. This boosts your next Dream Breath by 40%, which is just insane if you consider the fact that the players with Reversion on them will get an additional 15% on top of that thanks to Grace Period. Once Call of Ysera is active, it lasts for 15 seconds, meaning you now have between 13 and 14 seconds to send out as many echoes as you can on your raid. Once that is done, send out a 1-tick Dream Breath to get a very nice and strong HOT onto your raid. What is even more crazy is the added benefit that the players with echoes on them will get a double stack of Dream Breath, making this ramp extremely strong. You can obviously also use Living Flame, Spirit Bloom, and Verdant Embrace to consume your echoes, and there are times when this can be a good choice. All of these spells will do a moderate to high amount of direct healing, which works great for moments when you need your raid to be topped off fast. Using Verdant Embrace to consume your echoes has the added benefit of applying Lifebind on the people that had echoes on them. This is the setup for your Emerald Communion combo I will be discussing a little bit later in this video. Suffice it to say, Verdant Embrace with Lifebind can be a very powerful combo. You will be spending all of your Essence Burst procs on slamming out more echoes on your raid, and also using Temporal Anomaly to do the same. Living Flame is constantly being used to proc more Essence Bursts. One amazing change Blizzard did in the 10.2.5 patch was to allow the application Reversion to have a chance to proc Essence Bursts. This was a direct buff to this talent build, which helps smooth out its gameplay tremendously. So let's recap here for a little bit. You'll be spending most of your time when playing the Echo spec, building up your echoes on your raid, and then consuming said echoes with your various abilities. This is where the difficulty of the build lies, as the timing of building and consuming echoes is very tight. If you don't do it right, you can miss out on a ton of healing. To make this even more difficult, what you choose to use to consume echoes depends on the needs at the moment. This requires quick thinking and a very good understanding of the situation your raid finds themselves in at all times. It's not something like a guide like this can tell you exactly what to do and when. Every raid group and every pool is going to be different and have unique challenges associated with it. Making the right decision can make or break a ramp you just spent the last 15-20 seconds building up to. Make the wrong call and you just wasted a large amount of time on nothing. But make the right call and you'll be well rewarded. The talent Grace Period has a big impact on your gameplay decisions. You want to have this buff up as soon as possible on your raid, and you want to aim to have as high a uptime as possible on this buff on your raid. Sending out a big combo with no reversions out is not ideal, which means you have to carefully plan several damage cycles ahead to make sure your big burst healing combo hits people that have reversions on them already. Boss knowledge is critical for success of this build, and having a UI setup that allows you to see when certain things will happen will help you plan ahead better. Also, understanding how long your ramps take is of utmost importance, so you know when you need to start for you to be able to capitalize on the healing opportunities that you're planning for. In the end, this is a very complicated spec to play, but if you do it right, it can be very rewarding. Let's now talk about how to play the Big Blossom build. This is a much simpler build that does not have the same level of setup and tight timers like the Echo build does. Applying echoes is still important in this build, as it still provides additional healing from any source. We still run Grace Period, so any person with reversion on them gain more healing received. What we are doing in this build is fishing for Essence Burst procs as much as possible with Living Flame, which we primarily use for damage purposes. When we get our Essence Burst procs, we use them to drop down Emerald Blossoms on hopefully a group of players that are in need of healing and decently stacked together. And even if we do not have Essence Burst procs, we use our own Essence resource to push out even more Emerald Blossoms. This is a very mana hungry spell, which is why we want to get as many Essence Burst procs as possible to mitigate this cost. Every time an Emerald Blossom is sent, it will trigger Fluttering Seedlings, which then has a chance to trigger Field of Dreams, which then has a chance to trigger even more Emerald Blossoms, and so forth and so forth. All of which feeds into Cycle of Life for even more healing. But what do we do if we don't have any Essence and no Essence Burst procs, you might ask? Outside of using Living Flame and Reversions to fish for these procs, we want to use Temporal Anomaly to apply Echoes, which can then be consumed either with Reversion to trigger Grace Period and the chance for Essence Burst procs, which is always a really good use for your Echoes. Or we can use Spirit Bloom for large direct healing, or Dream Breath for a really nice big hot. It all depends on what you need at the moment. Try your best to have Reversions out on your raid though as much as possible, as it has an immediate positive effect on all your healing done thanks to Grace Period. But remember, don't overdo this either. You are still an Emerald Blossom pushing machine, and that's where your focus should lie. Believe it or not, you have now mastered the Big Blossom build from a mechanical standpoint. It is very simple to grasp and pick up, but can present itself with challenges due to the lack of control you have where your healing is going. You can mitigate some of this by having a very good understanding of the damage profile of boss fights, and being observant as to where your raid is moving. But in the end, who receives healing from your main healing spell Emerald Blossom and its various talents is completely random. If done correctly, you can do an insane amount of healing, but you want to make sure you are constantly aware of your mana bar when playing this spec. You want to make sure you plan out your Emerald Communion casts not only for healing, but more importantly to get your mana back. Same goes for your mana potion use. I use Potion of Frozen Focus, which requires me to sit down for 10 seconds to drink it. It is worth it though, as you gain a lot more mana back, but it means you will need to find 10-second windows where you can sit down without the need for movement or healing. Just like the Echo build, choosing what spell to use and when is still important. This is what playing an Evoker healer is all about, regardless of which talent build you use, which is why most people consider this to be the hardest healer to learn. The Blossom build provides players with an easy to pick up talent build, but the difficulty comes in how you manage your resources and time your burst windows to be effective. If you manage to do that, there are heaps of fun to have with this build, an insane amount of burst healing, but also provides high level mythic raiders the ability to min-max the throughput quite a lot. Leaving that conversation aside for now, let's discuss a few combos we should make sure we know how to execute, starting with Emerald Communion. This combo is available for both specs we have discussed in this video. Emerald Communion is a channeled spell that has a good amount of healing, but also provides us with a good amount of mana regeneration. There is a combo with this spell that can produce an immense amount of healing if done properly. So how do we start off this one? You guessed it, it starts with echoes. The first thing we want to do is make sure as many people in our raid has echoes applied to them as possible. Once the damage has hit, immediately hit Verdant Embrace on yourself. It is important that you do this on yourself, and I'll explain that in a little bit. Once you've done this, it'll trigger the talent Lifebind. This is the core of why this combo works very well with Emerald Communion. It does 40% of the healing done to anyone affected by Lifebind to heal others with Lifebind as well. Because you had echoes on everyone before you hit Verdant Embrace, that means that several players in your raid has this buff on them now and receiving any healing done. Immediately after hitting Verdant Embrace, cast Emerald Communion. Now, if you read what this spell does, it says that any overhealing done to you as the Evoker gets transferred to other allies. This is why you want to hit Verdant Embrace on yourself to fully top yourself up, which will cause all of the Emerald Communion healing to transfer to others. Well, a significant portion of your raid has Lifebind active when this goes off, which just causes a cascade of healing across the group that is just insane. As if that wasn't good enough, one of the main benefits of this spell is the mana it regenerates. This is extremely valuable in a raid setting, and especially if you're running the Big Blossom build. Another combo which is available for the Echo build and for people running a modified Big Blossom build is how to properly use Stasis. But first, what does Stasis actually do? Think of it this way, the moment you click the spell, it will record the next 3 healing spells you do and store them for later use. And you control when you want those 3 spells to be released, so long as it's within the 30-second stasis window. But before you click the stasis button, you want to make sure that all of the spells you want to record into your stasis are available for use. The following example is a burst healing combo with a moderate hot, but you can use everything you've learned in this video and my previous one to create several variations of this to suit your needs. It can be burst healing, huge amount of hots, even a mass dispel, and much more. Just make sure you consider the order in which you record your stasis. The order in which you record it is the same order it will be released. But let's get to it. First of all, click your stasis spell and then do the following. Hit Verdant Embrace either on yourself or a party member that needs healing. You do this to make sure that you trigger the Call of Ysera talent to boost your next Dream Breath by 40%. Number 2, use Dream Breath. I like to max charge it when I load it into stasis, as I'm more than likely gonna need it for immediate and direct burst healing. And thirdly, max out a full Spirit Bloom to once again make sure you do as much healing as you can onto your raid. When casting either Dream Breath or Spirit Bloom, make sure you use Tip the Scales to make either of them maxed out instantly, which saves you some time. What you have now done is not only all the healing you did while loading your stasis, but you also have 3 very powerful spells ready to go in one button click for when you need them. Also of note, our 2-piece tier set bonus still triggers off the Dream Breath and Spirit Bloom that you loaded into your stasis, which is why stasis became much more powerful with the current tier set. Before you release your stasis, make sure you once again have your raid blanketed with echoes. Why, you might ask? Well, the first spell we loaded into our stasis was Verdant Embrace, which means that when we release the stasis, Verdant Embrace will hit first, consuming all of your echoes and applying Lifebinder on the raid. It also triggers Call of Ysera again. It then sends out your now 40% buff Dream Breath and Spirit Bloom at the same empower levels as you loaded them with. That by itself is a lot of healing, but then consider the Lifebind healing on top of that, and the high chance of free Living Flames and Echoes, and you have one hell of a strong combo on your hand. That is it for this Preservation Evokers Season 3 Raid Healing Guide. I hope you enjoyed watching the video as much as I enjoyed making it. If you did like the video and found it helpful, make sure to hit that like button. And also leave me a comment on what you liked the most or what you're still having troubles with. I answer every single comment on my videos. If you want to support the channel even further, please also hit the subscribe button to join our ever-growing community of healers. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.